Let's talk about a war that lasted for pretty much a century. On one side, you have the British Empire, the biggest the world had ever seen, and on the other, the powerful Asante Empire in West Africa. This wasn't just a few isolated skirmishes. No, this was an epic, drawn-out struggle for survival, for identity, and really for the very soul of a nation.
To really get this conflict, you first have to understand what the Asante were fighting for, and it all came down to this: the golden stool. Now, this was not just some fancy chair. The belief was that it literally came from the heavens and held the spirit, the very essence of the Asante people. For an outsider to touch it, let alone sit on it, that was unthinkable. It would mean the end of their nation. This was a symbol they were absolutely willing to die for.
Okay, so long before the British even became a major issue, the Asante were already a regional superpower. And this empire wasn't something they just stumbled into. It was forged in battle and built with brilliant military tactics and this powerful unifying vision that made them the dominant force around.
And just look at how fast they rose to power. It all kicks off in 1701. Their founder, Osei Tutu, wins this huge, decisive battle. And from there, it's not just random fighting, it's smart, calculated expansion. First, they lock down their home turf against their rivals, and then, under the next ruler, Opoku Ware I, they just explode outward. In about 50 years, the Asante become the undisputed powerhouse, controlling huge amounts of land and, critically, the trade routes.
So you've got this established, ambitious African empire, and then you have this rapidly growing European one that's hungry for resources and power. You can see where this is going, right? A clash was pretty much inevitable, and that sets the stage for a conflict that would last 100 years.
And this, right here, this really lays out the heart of the problem. For the Asante, this was a fight for their very existence. They were defending their right to rule themselves, their control over their own economy, and their cultural identity, all wrapped up in that golden stool. And the British? Well, for them it was about expansion. It was about growing their colonial power, getting their hands on the region's massive gold wealth, and just completely dominating trade. Their goals just could not coexist.
Early on, the British made a massive mistake. They completely underestimated the Ashanti. In 1824, they march in expecting a quick, easy win. Instead, the Ashanti forces didn't just beat them, they completely annihilated them. The British governor himself, Sir Charles Macarthy, was killed in the battle. This sent absolute shockwaves across the colonial world. The Ashanti had just proven they were a disciplined, deadly force that could take down a modern European army.
But 50 years is a long time. The technology gap got a lot wider. The British were not armed with stuff like the new rapid-fire Martini Henry rifle, and they came back looking for revenge. This time, they launched a massive invasion. And they succeeded. They marched right into the capital city, Kumasi, and they burned it to the ground. This was more than a military loss. It was a deep national humiliation, and it was sealed with a treaty that was just designed to shame them.
So the British figured they'd finally broken the Asante spirit, right? They took over the territory, they sent the king into exile. But they made one more huge miscalculation. They decided to go after the soul of the nation itself. And in doing so, they lit the fuse for one of the most famous rebellions in all of African history.
With their king gone, a lot of the Asante chiefs who were left were thinking about surrender. They were losing hope. And that's when Yaa Asantewaa, a queen mother from a nearby state, stood up in a meeting and said this. Can you imagine the power of those words? She essentially shamed the men into action, picked up a weapon herself, and became the leader of the Asante rebellion. She single-handedly reignited their will to fight back.
So this final, desperate fight got its name from what started it, the War of the Golden Stool, and it all began with an unbelievable insult. The new British governor, Frederick Hodgson, strolls in and demands that the Golden Stool be brought to him so he could sit on it. The sheer arrogance. That profound disrespect was the final straw. It sparked the defiance, led by Yaa Asantewaa, and it launched their last war to protect the one thing that held them all together. Now, in the end, the Asante were militarily defeated, and their lands were officially absorbed into the British Gold Coast colony. But that's not where the story ends, not even close. In fact, their legacy of resistance is maybe more powerful today than ever, and it tells us so much about the region. So why does all this still matter so much? Well, for starters, that century of fighting created this powerful story of resistance that's at the very core of modern Ghanaian identity.
Even though they lost on the battlefield, the Asante spirit was never, ever broken. The incredible courage of leaders like Yaa Asantewaa became a symbol for anti-colonial fights all over the world. And because they fought so hard to protect their culture, that amazing heritage, their famous kente cloth, their stunning gold work, all of their traditions survive for all of us to see today.
So, when you look back at the Asante Wars, you're left with this really powerful question. Here was an empire that was facing impossible odds, that suffered terrible defeats, but that absolutely refused to let its identity be erased. How does that spirit, that incredible story of defiance against a global superpower, continue to inspire people fighting for freedom and self-determination all around the world today?